We're going to start with some definitions. Can anybody in physics tell me what a vector even is? This is going to be a little 3-section discussion of vectors. Can anybody even tell me what they are?
It has distance?
Well, it definitely has distance. If you go to the back of the first page, you'll see some vocab down there. That's where we're starting, in the back of the first page, vocab. But so does, Chloe, so does this line segment also has distance. What else does what does a vector have that makes it different than a line segment? Tommy? Well, it has some kind of directional component to it. So a vector is a directed line segment. And you remember from geometry, if this was point A and this was point B, when you wrote this, what did that describe? That notation right there, what was that talking about? Array. Now, rays are different than vectors. Rays start here, but this one starts at point A and goes forever and ever and ever. Vectors don't. Vectors have a distance. They have a scalar quantity, a component. They have a magnitude component. So vectors, we traditionally just put one little arrow on that to distinguish between them. Now, in your book, they use the double arrow, but they specifically are talking about vectors, so they're not worried about confusion. I'll try to use this so there's no confusion. This means the vector that starts at A and stops at B. It has direction and magnitude. Magnitude is the vector word for length. The study of vectors and matrices has its own vocabulary, unfortunately. So instead of talking about the vector's length, they talk about its magnitude. It means exactly the same thing. If I'm kind of mixing now my notes. I want to kind of mix it a little bit. Let me get some more definitions filled in. A unit vector. Anybody want to take a wild guess what that is? A unit vector? It's a vector whose magnitude is 1. It's a vector whose magnitude is 1. So any vector that has a length of 1 would be considered a unit vector. A position vector, anybody want to guess what that is? It's in standard position. Its initial point or its starting point is the origin. So a position vector is a vector who starts at the origin. So in other words, it would look like this. That would be a picture of a position vector. Its initial point, its starting point is the origin. While we're talking about that, this is called the initial point of the vector, the starting point, and then this is called the terminal point. Now remember, vectors have length, so they have a definite starting and stopping point. Where they start is the initial point, where they stop is the terminal point. So if I'm talking about vector AB, this picture right here, then A would be the initial point and B would be the terminal point. All vectors have distance, so they have a starting and a stopping place. The standard unit vectors, okay, so what are unit vectors again? Any vector with a length of 1. What's a position vector? Any vector that starts at the origin. If we put those two ideas together, there are two very, very important unit vectors. There's this one, where that's the point 1, 0, does that make sense that that would be important? It's right on the x-axis. And then the other one, of course, is this one, right on the y-axis. So those are position vectors and unit vectors. Those are called the standard unit vectors, and they have special names. This one is called I, and this one is called J. Any vector in 2 dimensions can be written as a combination of those two. And I'll try to talk more about that in the coming days, but I can't really do it at this point. So I and J are the standard unit vectors. What is I? It is the unit vector that starts at the origin and goes 1 unit on the x-axis. What is J? The unit vector that starts at the origin and goes 1 unit on the y-axis. There is a K. What do you think K might be? In the third dimension, if we have a 3-dimensional system where we have height, length, and width, K is the Z dimension. We have X and Y up here. K would be the Z dimension. Tommy, was your hand up?
When you have this standard vector or standard unit, can it ever not be on the origin?
Oh, a unit vector can be a position vector.
Yeah, but then
No, I and J start at the origin. Yep. Now, what we have to be careful about is vectors have 2 qualities. Vectors have a direction and a magnitude. So, actually, a vector has no position. You could take a vector and put it anywhere, and it would be exactly the same vector if it had the same direction and magnitude. If we're talking about specifically I and J, though, they are named vectors. They are specific vectors. They are here and here. You could certainly pick a vector up and pop it out here anywhere you wanted to. But I and J are specifically named. That's where they are. All right, what have I not done? Resultant. Anybody know what that is? Or you guys in physics, if you're in physics and you've talked about resultant forces? No, you haven't? Okay. Resultant is simply the sum of 2 or more vectors. The sum of 2 or more vectors. So if you add 2 vectors together, the sum is called the resultant. Now I want you to think about something for a minute. Suppose I want to walk out of the room. My motion is a vector, because as I walk out of the room, don't I have a direction and a distance? Magnitude is length, distance, right? What's my issue, though? My issue is I can't walk straight out of the room because there's all these people in the way. So what am I going to do? I'm going to walk over there. So there's the first leg of my journey. And then I'm going to turn and I'm going to walk out the door. Right? Now, what is the resultant? Here are the 2 legs of my journey. To get me out of the room, I got to walk over there and then turn and walk out. What is the resultant of that? What is the sum of those 2 vectors? It's this right here. That's the sum of those 2 vectors. That's the result of all my walking around. All my walking around resulted in me being right there. So this is called the resultant. It's the sum of these 2. If I call this vector u and this vector v, this would be u plus v. Okay. A scalar. Anybody know what a scalar is? Just a fancy vocabulary word for a real number. A scalar is simply a real number. So if I have a vector, well, let's use I. Let's use vector I. And I multiply it by a scalar. This is called a scalar. What would that look like? if I took my vector I and I timesed it by a scalar, which is just a coefficient, a real number, what would that look like? Do you think? 3 times. Be this right here. That would be it right there. It's just 3 times as long. Going in the same direction, but it's 3 times as long. This is called a scalar. You've called it a coefficient your whole life, and that's fine. We have a different vocabulary. It's called a scalar. A scalar quantity is just any real number quantity. Null vector. And I've kind of put in parentheses the 0 vector. Let's suppose that I walked over to Dakota. That's the black and white dog on the floor over there. Suppose I walked over to Dakota and turned around and walked back here. What would, I get some miles in or some steps in, but what would be the resultant of those 2 vectors? 0. I'm ending up right where I started. So if I add a vector, let's call it A, that's me walking over to Dakota. This is vector A, okay? And then I turned around and walked right back here. That would be the opposite of A. That would be the same vector, but in the opposite direction. What happens when I add those together? I get the 0 vector. When you add 2 vectors, you get another vector. So I can't say 0. I can't say the number 0. But I indicate that by saying it's the 0 vector. Okay? The null vector. That's what happens when you add opposite vectors. Now, it could happen other ways too. Suppose I started right here, and I walked over to Dakota, and I walked back to Maya, and I walked over here to Taylor, and then I came up here. I did a lot of walking, but what would be the resultant of all that? The null vector. I'd end up right back where I started. All right, velocity and speed. Okay, we're going to make a distinction between velocity and speed. Can any of you make the distinction for me? Do you know the difference? People on the street use those words interchangeably, and that's okay, but to mathematicians, they are different. Do you know what's different? Chloe?
Velocity has direction.
Exactly, velocity has direction. Speed has no direction.
Velocity, however, does.
Velocity does. So how I remember this is, okay, so velocity and speed are different things. Velocity has direction. So it is a vector. Velocity is represented by a vector. Speed, on the other hand, is just a scalar. So velocity vector, VV, speed scalar. When you put a direction with a speed, then you have velocity. If you say I'm going to go out and get in my car and drive 10 miles an hour, 10 miles an hour is a speed. It's a scalar. If you say I'm going to drive due north, 10 miles an hour, then it becomes a vector. Okay? All right. Great vocabulary. Let's try the first problem, and then I'll try to wrap us up for the day. I did get all the vocabulary, right?
Yeah.
Oh, we talked about standard unit vectors. What are the standard unit vectors?
Oh, is it the I?
That's I and J. I and J are the standard unit vectors. All right, so now I've got 2 random points out there, A and B. And certainly you could plot those points if you wanted to. I'm not saying you need to, but just so we have a visual here. do not have to plot them. Please don't feel that you do. But just so we have a picture. Now I'm going to draw the vector. Problem 1 says vector AB. Now you got to pay attention to the order those letters are in. That means you are starting at point A and moving, vectors are movement, you are moving to point B. So this is the vector. Now you're going to describe that movement using what we call a directed distance, also known as vector coordinates. It's very, very simple. The coordinates of vector AB would be 2, 2. Now, how did I do that? Where did the 2, 2 come from? Remember, I'm describing how I get from this point to this point. So what did I do in the x direction? Right 2, positive 2 in the x direction. What did I do in the y direction? Up 2, positive 2. That's why that vector has coordinates 2, 2. These coordinates tell me, my directed distance tells me 2 positive in the x direction, 2 positive in the y direction. Are there other vectors out there that could have the same directed distance as that one?
Yes.
Yeah, millions of them, right? Yeah, all right, well, we'll talk more about that tomorrow. Have a great day. I will see you tomorrow. No, but I will see you on Friday.
This is for
See you on Friday.
Do you just subtract
Now.
-1 or -2?
You can, I don't, I just think about I'm going from this point to this point, so how am I getting there? But yes.
Always work for it?